Welcome, everyone. For today's webinar, we want to say thanks for joining us, first and foremost. My name is Dan Ellisinger. I'm an application support engineer with exocad America, and I'm joined with my colleague here, Lucas Chardulo.
Hey everyone, thanks Dan. Yeah, I'll be helping out answering questions. So just a quick note throughout the webinar, if you do have any questions about the content that Dan's going over, just type your questions in the Q&A box there and we'll try to get those answered through the webinar.
So today we're going to cover PartialCAD 3.1 Rijeka highlights. So there's some really awesome new features we're excited to show you. But one thing for our web shop that we're offering trainings now. So due to heavy demand at every trade show we go to, we constantly get asked, how do we get training from the exocad team? Outside of our normal resellers that provide training when you buy their products, and then we have our certified independent trainers. So now on shop.exocad.com, you can schedule trainings within 1 hour sessions up to complete ultimate bundle training. So that's going to cover all modules that you choose, and you can have up to 25 employees from your organization join those. And then recordings will be distributed as well for those trainings to all purchasing parties. So let's go ahead and get started with our webinar, DentalCAD 3.1 Rijeka. When you install the 3.1 PartialCAD Rijeka, you're going to see a little bit different file structure than what is, from a normal download perspective. So when you get the software package, you're going to see 3 folders within our 7-zip file that comes with it. So you're going to see a CAD data folder. So within there, that's going to be a separate demo file that's going to be utilized for our new beta feature called Quick Snap. So we're going to show you that towards the end of the webinar. You're going to see a Dental DB folder. So with the beta feature, you're actually going to have a separate work params just for the Quick Snap. And then our PartialCAD app, that's the normal folder you would see. So within the installation, essentially when you unzip the package to the installation folder of DentalCAD, it's going to add the PartialCAD app. It's going to add the config file within the Dental DB. So if I navigate to my config, we're going to see that's already been added. And then also within our CAD data, it's going to add that sample case. You will have to actually import that in. And we'll go over that later throughout the session. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump to our first case for today. Today we're just going to cover an upper partial that's going to include metal dummies for tooths 5 and 13. So we have partial denture teeth that are set up. They're going to be used as reference objects within PartialCAD. And then the metal dummies are actually going to be added to the frame. So we're going to go over how to design that within PartialCAD today. And one thing to note about that installation, so I said there's separate work params. So we're always working on our default work params unless you or your customers have created their own. But there is going to be that separate quick snap. So anytime you guys want to utilize that feature when creating a new case, you're going to have to select this drop down and then select this work params DB-quick snap. Okay. So let's go ahead and move into designing partial framework. So we already have our Ponix and DentalCAD graded, so nothing new has changed there. I'm going to start by loading a scan only. So we'll ignore those scene files. And you'll notice a couple of things probably right off the bat. My installation is in dark mode. So really quick within our context menu, so I'm going to right click in the background. So we can go to settings. So look in here. We have a few settings that we're going to cover today. So there's auto backup scenes I have enabled by default here. So that's going to save scene copies at every wizard workflow stage. And then also use custom color schemes. So I have that enabled. So that allows me to use this dark mode. And then mouse wheel dynamic preview for bar, clasp, and finish line. So that'll allow you to use some hotkeys that we'll cover. That'll allow you to adjust orientation and parameters of those steps. And we'll go ahead and close that. Just a note, and it even says it up here. So it's going to require a relaunch to take effect if you make any changes. And then also within the context menu, something you can do is save backup scenes at any part in the process or load a backup scene. So if you want to revert to a step you've already saved, you'll have that option to do, and it's pretty quick and seamless. So sometimes you may want to go back a few steps and discard some changes you made. So that's definitely available. And then the color scheme. So this is where all the users can really fine tune the user interface and the colors. So it's pretty cool that you get to customize the display of the software. So it's as simple as clicking on one of the objects and defining the color you want. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go into expert mode, just to kind of give a little bit of display here of some different icons that you'll see. So we've actually kind of shortened the amount of options within here, kind of combined steps. So you'll see, with edit wax, that now combines with our edit blockout. Our mesh connector really combines all steps for that as well. Another thing that's pretty nice with the trim scan. So I'm going to select no on our blockout tool. So within trim scan, we actually have a plane cut option. So as you see, as I'm rotating my mouse, I have an arrow. So anything within this arrow, I'll have the ability to delete. So with the software creating a refractory model based off the scan, if you decrease that, and I can use my selecting tool here, if I hold shift, I can remove any parts that go through that scan. So from there, once we have everything selected we want to remove, we can just select the delete button, and now we've trimmed that scan. Okay. And we'll continue with more of the wizard with the expert mode functionality throughout the process today. Okay, I'm going to go back into wizard. So with blackout mode, nothing's really changed here. Reduce scan, that's another option that's already been available. So we'll go ahead and select next. All right, so not much has changed in this either. So with smooth and smudge still available, you still have your standard smooth, additive smooth, and remove subtractive smooth. So, this type of case, if you wanted to add a little bit excess blockout, maybe on the attachments, you can do so to block those areas out. And we'll go ahead and move forward by selecting next. All right, so now that we're at the draw connectors and mesh curves step, so I'm going to quickly go ahead and outline where we want our retention meshes to be placed. And okay. I always like to remind people that, your curves don't have to be exactly perfect as you're placing them. You'll have the ability to edit those throughout the process. So once your curves are connected, then you'll be able to kind of change those up. So we'll draw in the remainder of our major connector, place some points. And for those of you who aren't too familiar with the software, all I'm doing at this point is just left clicking my mouse to place points. And from there, once I get to the end of my spline, I will double click to complete that action. And at any point, you can left click and drag existing points that you've already placed. So the way PartialCAD is configured with your major connector and your retention meshes, you're going to want some overlap within those two areas. So as we're looking here, I want to extend, make sure I have good connection or overlap, I should say, with my retention mesh and my major connector. Doing that will actually allow the software to automatically define which part is going to be the mesh and which part's going to be your connector. So within this step, you can also add some tissue supports or tissue stops just by simply left clicking some points. I usually go to a occlusal view when I'm doing that. And we can edit that one. Okay. So we'll go ahead and proceed to the next step. And this is within here, you're going to see your two tabs for mesh and connector. One of the new features here that we have is mesh rim. So this is basically going to create a perimeter around our retention meshes for us. So that's really a nice feature, especially if you're 3D printing and sometimes if you have open holes on parts, with supports and getting things off a build plate, that can be helpful to have that perimeter of wax around there. Also within our patterns, so we have new options. So you'll see by clicking through there, we have the round packed closer and then round packed. So that's just some different retention meshes that you can utilize. So same as previous version, you can rotate your mesh pattern, left click and drag the center point accordingly. You can scale individual from mesh to mesh, or you can do wholesale changes here. So another thing to point out, if we look here, custom settings. So as I'm changing settings, I can actually save settings to be used as a preset now. So if I open my folder, it'll be saved in this exocad RPD mesh connector presets. As you can see, I had already set one up. Alternatively, if you change something and you want to go back to defaults, it's as simple as use default button there. So we'll go ahead and enable our mesh rim, and from there we'll go ahead and select apply. And once that's done, generating our preview, so you can see our tissue supports, our mesh riser, and our major connector have all been defined automatically for us. So now we can see all those have been added. We do have a 2D cross section now that's available. So for this, you can kind of adjust your slicer position here. You can zoom in and zoom out with your mouse wheel. And then alternatively, we'll go ahead and if you hold control when you open that, you'll get a little bit larger of a display. So that window will increase dramatically there. So you do have a context menu here. So you could, if you wanted to show block out, and then from there, you can left click and drag to start measurements. If you hold control, you can add additional measurements. So you have a lot of functionality here to really kind of visualize and measure throughout the process there. Go ahead and close that. All right, so let's go ahead and move forward. And with this type of case, we're not actually going to do any clasping. We'll do that in our next case. All right, so that brings us to our fill-in wax tool. A couple of ways to kind of attack this type of case. I personally like to kind of come through here and make sure I have a little bit of connection with where our metal dummies are going to be added. I'll bring those in slightly. So, and then we'll move forward after this, but I usually get my connections kind of in place before I move forward with this. So I typically kind of move back and forth when it comes to clone tool and add and remove. But we can make sure we have solid connection there. And alternatively, you can add in your part, your tooth for 5 and 12 there. So, but for me, this is the method I like to use, and then we can kind of fill back in after the fact as well. So we'll go ahead and move forward with this. And I am hitting Control and Spacebar. So that's a nice feature that's been added, similar to DentalCAD. So that's a hotkey to essentially basically move to the next step without having to move your mouse over there. So that's Control and Spacebar. Okay, so right now we're at the draw finish line curve. So I can start adding in my points on where I want my curve to be. Double click to finish. And similar to major connector and mesh step, we don't necessarily have to have a perfect line in this stage. You can edit, but if you move to the next step, you'll actually be able to adjust those points dynamically. So one thing to point out, so we obviously have the option to rotate with the rotational arrow there, adjust points, and so forth. But alternatively, you can hold Alt, so you see how rotation pops up on screen there. And I'm using my mouse wheel, so that's adjusting that dynamically. And then I can click on my next finish line and perform the same option and rotate that finish line in the aspect that I'd like, or the orientation, I should say. And then we can adjust points. We get the correct orientation we want. Also, by holding Control with your mouse wheel, you can adjust your thickness and shift your width. So, and once again, within settings, to enable that, you're going to want mouse wheel dynamic preview. And that'll affect bar, clasp, and finish line, and similar functionality. Okay. All right, so moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and move next, which will apply that for me. And that'll bring us to our add part section. So with our part options here, you're going to see reference. So those are going to be what's used for our partial denture selections, and our reduced anatomic conics that were selected. Those are we're going to convert those to be a solid wax. So we're going to add that to the frame and make it to where we can add, remove, smooth, and adjust that material accordingly. So one thing with the part options now, for multiple teeth selections that are going to be the same option, you can left click on your first tooth, hold Control, and then select all the additional parts that you want to use the same option. So once we convert that to a solid wax, we can apply the selection. Okay, so those have added that to the part. Another thing to point out here is our hollow wax feature. So hollow wax will actually take any part that you load in and convert that to be wax on the outside with a hollow interior surface. So those are really kind of two the major changes there. Whereas if we go into expert mode, you can see our show hide menus actually change. So at any point, you can import parts from here. And just to kind of show some functionality, that the default installation, so in our PartialCAD app folder, there's going to be a data folder, and there's just some sample files here that we can adjust. So we have a cube file here. So just to kind of show that once you have that part enabled, you can move. So left click and drag to move in any orientation you want. There's the rotate feature. So, and once again, just left click and drag, and then scale with that same mouse movements. So from there, any parts you add in, you can really, adjust the orientation and place them, in the correct placement. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that part. I just wanted to show that functionality. And we'll go over some more show hide functionality within our quick snap demonstration. Okay, so now that we are within expert mode, so I'm going to show, we're going to draw some curves just to kind of cover the rest of our metal backings here. So, and we can fill in with our clone tool after the fact. So we'll just make basic spline here just to kind of show that functionality. And as I've been designing, and you guys may have noticed that the model's jumping from different sections, different vantage points. So I personally like to utilize the mouse wheel button to center my view. So that might be a useful tip for you guys when you're utilizing the software. Just when you're working in different areas of the model, it's nice to be able to kind of switch that orientation quickly to center. One thing to note when you do that, you will essentially kind of create a new access point for your rotations as well. So just keep that in mind. Looks like I added an additional point there. Okay, so now that we have our curves in place, I'm going to go to our mesh connector step. And you can see that the software is kind of already determined that it's going to be using the connector. So that's perfectly fine. We're going to change this to be smooth. And in these scenarios, depending on, I would say, the offset, so your distance between the refractory model and our wax, you can decrease that, maybe increase your thickness, and then hit apply. And now our second spline has been selected as well. So we'll go ahead and apply with the same settings. So from here, I'll go ahead and move to our clone tool, kind of just fill in any areas that I didn't include in my spline, make sure I have adequate coverage, get that uniform thickness in those areas. And once I'm done with this, I will kind of cover another thing that's with the clone tool. You can actually see that clone blockouts available. So I'll click on that here shortly. We get a better transition there. All right, so like I was saying, with clone blockout, at any point you can actually switch to this to add additional blockout material and change your thickness and tool size as well for this. So it's kind of a great feature when, anytime you see any areas that need additional blockout, that's kind of a quick fix to do so within clone, as well as your edit wax. So edit wax, you have edit blockout, which will give you similar functionality. It's just you're using a different tool set. So with your smooth and smudge tools, you can add blockout that way. From here, since we're still in expert mode, we'll cover adding some posts. So that's we have some new posts in this software as well. So one thing to kind of show with your default posts, nothing's changed there. You can still rotate, adjust within settings here. You can align to surface normals. So any of the normals that's facing where you selected, it's going to align that post to it. You still have the ability to adjust length and thickness as before, and change your end thickness. So from there, you can hit apply. From use file. So this box here. So this will give you an option to select posts that are that come with the software from the default installation. So within the PartialCAD app folder features, you'll see posts, and then from there you'll see some new options throughout there. We can load a couple of them real quick just to kind of give you guys an idea. But you know, due to customer request, there's been some additional post styles that have been added. So we'll go ahead and apply that one. And then we'll move forward to the next style. So we have this devil's head here. We can go ahead and zoom in, kind of show you that style. Okay, so I know we got a couple of twisted options there. Oh, a little too far. We'll increase our thickness just so you guys can visualize the new styles there. And we just go ahead and add another one there and apply. So, you know, with the new version here, you're gonna have different post options, and it's pretty simple to add those on. Functionality of adding those hasn't changed much. So from here, we'll go ahead and go back into our wizard mode and move forward so we can edit our wax. And right now we're on our smooth, so we can kind of just gently kind of balance in all the different layers of wax that we put on, different thicknesses, blend them together. Might need to increase my smooth value there. So you can do that with holding control and your mouse wheel, and that'll adjust your blending levels. And then from there, we'll go to the other quadrant. Go ahead and perform that same action. And today we're trying not to focus too much on older functionality, so I'm just kind of blending it rather quickly. Okay. So the next thing, it's a pretty cool feature as well. Just similar to previous versions, but the wax mode only. So anytime you over smooth areas, you can just kind of gently left click to get any perforated material that may be kind of thinned out from over smoothing. So we can just quickly left click those areas. And with the refractory model being off, we can actually turn to the underneath side, add or smooth any transition points as needed. And then in the final stage, when we go to build, when the refractory model is present, then we'll actually be able to remove any interferences that way automatically. So I'll go ahead and turn wax mode off and select next. And that'll bring us to our build stage. So one thing to note within settings, so you have a build tab. Here's reduced tolerance that will decrease your file size. But if you go into expert mode within build, you do have a separate tab here. So we have basically your static relief and dynamic relief. So I want to just show you guys something here. So if I apply my relief, let's hit the eye icon so we can really visualize the blockout material that's available. And so now I'm applying the relief, and it's going to add any of our static and dynamic relief so we can visualize those. Essentially, by these default settings, this is really adding in any blockout material in the areas that are defined here. So by default, it's not adding any for the clasp, and your connector, it's adding a small amount there, 0.035. So you can kind of visualize that blockout that it's doing. So in the dynamic relief, it's really just applying relief dynamically over I would say, irregular surfaces in your refractory model. where static's just more of a standard value that's being added. So I can go ahead and turn that off, and we can apply for build. Okay, so basically at this step, it's going to convert your wax design to an STL file. And once it's finished, you're going to be able to visualize on your scan. You can actually utilize the new exploded feature to visualize the frame itself, or in show hide, you could turn the scan off. But we'll go over that exploded view again in our next case. So that's just kind of a basic overview of some of the changes with the tools and workflow and some show hide functionality. And we'll cover some more in the next case here. So go back into Wizard, and we can select Done. I'm not worried about saving that today. Okay, we'll go ahead and clear that out. And let's see, we got our upper partial for quick snap. So you'll notice this does have the imported from project file work params. When you open this up, so this is utilizing those quick snap params we talked about. So you're going to see with quick snap, the intention is to really get closer to a full digital partial. So this is really cool. Essentially, you're going to be able to design the teeth and the virtual gingiva within DentalCAD. And once that's completed, it actually gets brought into PartialCAD. So it imports that in automatically. And the goal here is you're going to design somewhat of a standard frame, and the software is going to separate your virtual gingiva and put your frame directly in the middle. So, essentially you can see in this little thumbnail icon that there are positive nubs on that bottom gingiva and top gingiva. So those go into the retention mesh, and same with the teeth. So it all snaps together. So we'll go over that process here, and hope you guys enjoy it. We've got some really good feedback from beta testers, and people have been using it within their laboratories as well. So, all right, we'll go ahead and move forward with design partial framework. Okay, and nothing's really changing here, so I'm just going to keep the default orientation. And with that at block out, one thing I didn't bring up, so with smudge, some people are didn't know this when I tell them, but if you hold shift, you can actually block out material, where smudge by default is removing material. So just want to make that known as well. So from here, we can edit our block out for anywhere we're going to have clasping. Oh, I went back too many stages there, it looks like. Yep. So we can quickly remove any material there. Expose some undercuts for the clasping to engage into. One thing, making that your tool a little bit larger can make it, I feel, a little easier to remove that quickly. It just kind of blends in pretty nicely doing that as well. Okay, so now we've edited some block out. We'll go ahead and move forward to our next step. Okay, so draw a mesh, draw our connector and meshes. And we'll kind of show this a little bit in the next step with the settings, but by default, we're actually going to fit our retention meshes within the virtual gingiva. So it's going to kind of combine all those materials and within the gingiva. So we'll quickly draw in some curves here. And double click again, close our spline. And we'll just draw in a quick connector here, just to show you guys the functionality. Like I was saying with the previous case, we want to make sure we have a good overlap so the software can determine which piece will utilize what settings. Double click. Okay, so with Quick Snap work params, when you're using that, you are going to see this separate split gingiva tab. So we still have our mesh rim if we want to add that in. Like I said, the fit inside part, so that's going to fit the parts it's generating now inside the virtual gingiva that's designed. And then if you go through connector, we can see, I'm sorry, it was split gingiva here. So split gingiva bottom part, 2 parts. So it's looking at that gingiva bottom, or mesh interlock. So that's the setting that controls, it fits into the mesh interlock. And one thing we didn't really discuss with connectors, but stipple patterns. So if you want to adjust what patterns you use for your major connector, that's definitely still available in that tab. And you can see here there's check marks by default. So we're creating our mesh, creating our connector, and creating the split gingiva. And similar to the standard partial design workflow, how you can adjust your settings and then create your own default settings to be used for this stage, that's available as well with the Quick Snap workflow. And one thing that we'll cover later on is the assemble parts, and that's where you can adjust kind of fit settings or parameters of how the parts all fit together. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward to the next step here. We can throw in some quick clasping. So for drawing your clasp, you can just left click points where you want your clasp to be present. Bring up onto a occlusal rest in that area. Just quickly add some points. Adjust that a little bit. Okay. There we go. I was clicking on my dot on accident there. All right, so our next clasp, go ahead and add in and our final one. All right, so kind of go over a different method as well. We can add in another spline here to do a different style clasping. So we'll move forward to the next step here. So in apply clasp, we do have our profiles that you can choose from. There's the different class types that you'll select. So for instance, with our cuspid, we can go ahead and select our class style there. One thing to note, the software is even going to tell you your connecting curve needs to be selected before your ring curve. And that'll generate a visualization for you, and then you can adjust your clasp accordingly here. And from there, for custom profiles, you can actually create your own by adjusting within there, and then it'll be added into your drop down here. Okay, so once you have your clasping where you want, you can hit the apply stage. Actually, I am going to hit undo here real quick. I want to show you guys something else. So we'll go ahead and click that again, but on settings. So for taper ends, We did change the color orientation so you can kind of see that each end has a different color. And then if you do a connecting curve, you can adjust that value as well. So, and then there's class smoothing. So sometimes when you hit different angulation of a refractory model, there might be a little bit of kind of overlap or some kind of areas of the class you'd want it smoothed a little bit more. So as you adjust this, it's going to smooth that for you. Obviously, you have the option to do so and edit wax, but want to at least show that capability to where if we wanted to increase one of the ends or decrease one of the thickness of the tapered ends, then you can do so by these scroll bars. Okay, so we'll go ahead and apply that one again. And from there, we'll go ahead and move to a different class type. We'll place that in. My lines kind of got away from me on this one, so we'll adjust accordingly. Okay, we'll go ahead and apply that. And then we'll move on to our next clasping and apply those in place as well. Maybe we're a little too gingival there, so it's kind of the nice thing about these steps that you can actually adjust dynamically and have that 3D rendering while you're doing so. So it's a good visualization tool. All right, so we have our class in place. We'll go ahead and select next. And now that will bring us to our fill-in wax tool. So with our minor connector, major connector, so it'll basically with these presets, it's going to adjust the thickness that are totally adjustable. So depending on the thickness that you want to utilize in those areas, you can do that accordingly and fill in those areas. All right. Add in a little thickness there for support. We can blend that in the next stage. All right, so in this stage as well, we'll add our occlusal rests. So we'll adjust our tool size, and you can just left click and drag to kind of fill those areas in. Wanted to add, on any of the surfaces you can. We'll fill in all of our rest seats. All right. So all right, so now that we have our wax added in, we can move forward to our next step. So we can draw our finish lines and curves, but within Mesh Connector, the semi-auto finish line. So that will actually create a finish line for you based on the edge of your gingiva. So we can still add it in the normal way, but that checkbox does actually automatically add that in for you. So for here, we'll kind of add in our finish line and adjust accordingly. Okay. Which will show us doing this way. Actually, it'll be kind of nice. We'll actually show you some of our expert mode functionality with the automatically added in parts. So it's actually a pretty cool feature we'll go over. All right, so finish line's roughly in the area we want. I know we're getting close on time, but once that's applied, we'll go ahead and move into our edit wax features. So essentially in expert mode, we're going to go in and be able to adjust the other parts in our case here. So I'm going to first start off with smooth, just kind of blend in our finish line as we discussed earlier. Just slightly blend our rest seats. Okay. And from there, from a show hide standpoint, we can expand our wax parts so we can see our gingivas there. And typically I'll kind of look at my framework without the gingiva on, make sure everything's connected from the different layers of wax. Okay, just blend those in quickly. All right, so now we'll go ahead and get into expert mode. So like I was saying, pretty cool feature here. So I'm going to turn on my gingiva again. I'm going to right click on this. I'm actually going to, for one, let you guys see that there is a context menu for each part that's within here. So there's intersection operations to where if you want to crop your parts up against another parts, if you want to copy into a new part, there's a lot of options here. I am just going to activate this one by left clicking on activate there. And so what that's going to do, it's actually going to enable me to work on my gingiva itself. So essentially, we can still make our framework visible or invisible. And from there, any material like I was poking through on from a finish line perspective, I can just lightly blend those away. That way we don't have any interferences or excess material there. So that's one thing we can do. We can activate the teeth that came in. So occasionally you may want to make some adaptations, to the underneath side of the ponics, potentially open up some additional room and embrasures to essentially leave more room for the split gingiva. So I'll go ahead and enable our wax mode only. So our teeth are activated. And then once that's activated, we can go ahead and move forward and maybe use a subtractive smooth in between. So that'll kind of open up a little bit more material there for gingivas. Obviously be mindful of your connector strengths. Okay. So really any of the tools that you see here, whether you want to use the tug tool on parts that are imported in or clone tool, add, remove, draw splines on the parts that are imported in. So that's you got a lot of functionality within the new expert mode within PartialCAD. So we'll go back into our wizard mode. When we move forward from edit wax, actually we'll kind of do a wax mode only on our frame as well. Okay. So this is where we can kind of make sure we don't have any kind of thin areas where I was smoothing. So I just did maybe like 4 or 5 left clicks to kind of complete that. Looks like I do have a little bit of extra material there. All right. So we'll move forward to the next step. And that brings us to our assemble parts. So this is where it's going to separate those gingiva pieces and apply the retention nubs to our teeth and top and bottom gingivas. So we'll go ahead and apply that step. And it's basically the steps preparing all of the different pieces for the final build step. So it's doing those final kind of calculations there and adjusting accordingly. And once that's completed, we'll go ahead and be able to apply the build settings. Okay, so now it's converting our wax to the mesh and saving our build as STL files. And now that that's completed, as before, so this is where that exploded view can come in handy too. So when you're looking at the different parts of your quick snap, you can see your teeth, your top gingivas, your frame and your lower gingiva. So that's really the effect that you'll have when designing these types of cases. And then other alternative, if you hold control when you hit the exploded view, it'll keep the teeth together with that top gingiva. So that way you can see all the retention meshes and how that's going to interact with the frame and the lower gingiva. Okay, so I know I already said it earlier, but want to thank everyone that joined in today. Sorry, I had a little bit of computer issue there, but we're pretty excited about all the new functionality, and I think everybody's going to love it. It's kind of opening up a lot of doors from a digital fabrication standpoint with partials. So, yeah, thanks again for joining.